Hello. I want to draw on a case which I think highlights a very deep problem in our criminal justice system. Now, I do feel sometimes when I make these videos, it sounds like beating a dead horse because, for want of a rather unpleasant old saying, um, because I do feel like I talk about it a lot. And I've made a lot of videos where I'm highlighting the cases. But the reason I do that and talk about specific cases is because I think although individual cases have their own circumstances, there is a trajectory. And in a sense, it is, apart from spreading knowledge of my contentions here, sort of opening up dialogue, or rather discussion about these things, awareness is probably the best word. It's also for my own kind of record, because I've long felt um, a strong desire to do something about it. I don't know what yet, because I don't exactly have connections. I'm not a police officer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a barrister. Um, so I'd be starting from scratch. But that's kind of the pretext, in a sense, for talking about these things, so that I have a record to go on, that is to refer to. Um, so I don't know what form that will take. It might be setting up a charity, is like, for example, for victims of crime, would be one possibility. But there are some very strict rules governing how charities operate, and I'm not sure how flexible that would be in terms of what could be said in terms of using whatever it is I set up as a campaigning forum. So maybe some sort of think tank or something like that might be an option. But this is something I'm taking seriously, and of course it could be very time consuming. That's another aspect I need to consider. But regardless, something has to change. So I'm going to read out a bit of the case. This is from the website This is Lancashire, which is kind of a local news in the northwest of England. The report is by Joanne Rowe. You is the nicest guy I have ever met. Defendant's thanks to judge at being freed from jail. I actually came across the story. It was reported in some of the tabloids. Um, and that looks like it's given me a block. Great. Um, I think it's that's frustrating. The link I had is now putting up a ad block. Right, I'll try and work with another source. Basically, this case is quite troubling. It's That's frustrating. Um, I don't want to restart the video. If you just bear with me a second, I'll get it directly from. I think it was the Sun that reported it actually. But because I take it to view the tabloids, I always like to back them up with something else. This is backed up. That's frustrating. Just as I was about to read it out, an ad block appears. Bear with me a second. Yeah, this is in the Sun from the 9th of March. That's entitled Lout's Joy for Judge. A thug freed twice in 7 months by the same judge. Wookton told him, "You are the nicest guy I've ever met." Levi Todd, 36, stunned court officials by screaming, "Sweet, woohoo! Thank you, thank you." He admitted beating his girlfriend and got 3 months jail, but Judge Timothy Stead told Bolton Crown Court he'd served enough time on remand. Todd punched the air last August when he got a community order for waving a fake gun in the street. He faced 10 years. Now, how do you get a discrepancy like that? From 10 years to a community order? I would seriously question the judgment of this judge. Now he's beat a woman. He left her with a bloody lip, and according to the This is Lancashire source, she was left feeling anxious and paranoid. So Judge John Steed decided to reward him by taking away the custodial sentence, saying he'd already served enough time on remand. This is preposterous. It's preposterous because we have seen time and time and time again violent criminals be given a tap on the wrist only to go out and commit more or more serious crime. I mean, what sort of deterrent is that? The defendant himself was overjoyed. Not surprisingly, he got off the hook. Um, he was given a restraining order for 3 years, but that's meaningless because if he breaks that and he appears before the same judge, it's likely the same thing will happen again. This judge isn't in the real world. I mean, what sort of message does that send out? We're getting, the focus on women's safety is in the news again because of this awful murder of the young woman in London, Sarah Everard, by a police officer, which is disgraceful. I think the Met that needs to look at the vetting process, or there definitely needs to be an approach to that, not the green approach. Apparently, a green here lady stood up in the House of Lords and said that there should be a 6 p.m. curfew for all men. That's absurd. You don't target bad men by punishing all men. But clearly, women are feeling understandably scared to go out, and that needs to be tackled. But I don't think that these things can be tackled by basically showing leniency that is not going to help the victims. Um, and importantly, it isn't going to help potential future victims. Um, it really is staggering. I mean, I just don't buy that this guy will go out and say, "Oh, I better change my ways," and then he'll never appear before court again. Um, and his next victim, it could be even worse. She could be hospitalized or even killed. And as far as I'm concerned, if that happens, her blood will be on Judge Timothy Stead's hands. And I think he should. This is a point that I really want to emphasize: accountability. I was going to say I think he should really be shamed because, as it stands, this to me is one of the most fundamental problems. Judges are in a position of power, but they're not really accountable to the public. People will say, well, you weren't in the trial, you didn't hear all the evidence, mitigating factors, etc. But there is a fundamental principle at work here. It's about accountability of power. You know, MPs, people can complain about them. If we don't like an MP, we can write to their constituency office. We can not vote for them, or we can vote them out of office. Enough dissent. There are avenues to show contentions towards elected parliamentarians. Now, judges aren't elected, but they are also in a position of power, as legislators are. So why is it so difficult to have any recourse to hold these sort of judges to account? You try Googling Judge Timothy Stead, and you'll get very few results. There's no sort of office number or address or anything like that. There's the court, but really there is no recourse. In some cases, anyone can contact the Attorney General, and she can refer that, I understand, to the Supreme Court, or the Appeals Court. But that isn't a guarantee that it'll happen. I.e., if there's enough anger at a particular sentence and people feel that the sentence needs to be reviewed for undue leniency, occasionally Home Secretaries have waded into it. But I feel there is a long track record of British judges doing that sort of thing. There was another case, I think it was in the southwest of England, where a judge actually got in victim blaming, essentially. A young teenage girl had been raped, and he said it was an awful incident, but the way this young lady dressed may have in part provoked it. That's not verbatim, but that was the gist of what he was arguing, which was absolutely abhorrent. Now, I don't think that judges get anywhere near enough scrutiny. They may be in a pressurizing and difficult job, but they really, really don't have to face public anger. in the same way that MPs would. And I think that's wrong. I am not proposing that they be elected, but because I think there could be inherent problems with that. But, particularly if you had, like, say, an area where there's a large Muslim population, you could have people demanding pro Sharia judges. There could be murky areas with that. I'm not necessarily saying that's the approach, but I do think that if there is public anger at a particular sentence, there needs to be a much easier way for that sentence to be reviewed rather than going through the Attorney General and having to go through that process because, it's just not guaranteed. I think there needs to be a localized situation. I think it needs to be, frankly, a lot more democratic and accountable to the public. I'm just not convinced that a case like this, the defendant, will just go away and change his life. Maybe he will, maybe, but there have been so many cases where violent criminals have walked away with a tap on the wrist and they've went on and committed more serious crime. So it's infuriating. I can put a link to the source, but unless you live in Lancashire, it might not be, unfortunate there's a paywall there, which is frustrating because when I read the report, it was a good summary of the details. But this isn't even the worst example I've come across. It was just one of many. So if I do decide to set something up, it might be as simple as a Facebook group. It might be, you know, uh, obviously something like a think tank is more complex, and I would really need to do my homework on that. But I feel strongly enough about this that I think something needs to be done. If it means setting up some sort of lobby group or something, and what would I be asking for? I would be asking for more accountability of judges, um, more public say in sentencing, and a much more transparent, flexible, and straightforward way for people to have some empowerment over sentencing. Because after all, when defendants appear before a court, it's the public that are at risk of violent criminals. Surely the public should be empowered to have some say in that. I'm not saying that sentencing should just be from mob rule. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it should be far more accountable than it currently is. Far more accountable. It's repugnant. These judges, frankly, they infuriate me because I don't know what's going on in their mind to think that that is an appropriate, approach to someone who has, beat up a woman. Um, Incidentally, neither report that I saw mentioned anything about the defendant showing any remorse, so I think that's notable. But if I do set something up, I'll try and put links maybe in this video or maybe even make a particular video about it. So watch this space. But I do feel strongly enough about it. The only things is like a charity. If I set up a charity, there's a lot of red tape to go through with that, and it might mean there's limited flexibility. Think tank I would need to do a lot of research in. As it stands, it might be something as simple as just a Facebook group. But at least if that was galvanized enough, it would kind of give a momentum, for a sort of mandate for something to happen. Um, so it could be something like that. Um, but I'm convinced that something needs to change. I think that the vast majority of the public are not convinced that our criminal justice system is on the side of victims. The Sentencing Council of England and Wales, they have all these sort of scenarios where they claim that public sentiments actually match their sentencing. I think it's somewhat disingenuous because they're very high. If you look at the Sentencing Council's website, they're very strong on, self praise. But I don't think it's entirely um, the full picture what they're showing there. I mean, for one thing, they state on their website that they are reluctant to punish juveniles, 16-year-olds. So If a group of 16-year-old thugs beat someone up or raped a woman at knife point, the logic of the Sentencing Council of England and Wales is we're reluctant to give them a punishment. Um, Frankly, I think we need tougher punishments for violent crimes. I will say one thing: the Home Secretariat and other Tory MPs who were backing this proposal, they're proposing 10 years for vandalising war memorials. Now, I've mixed views on that because, on one hand, I come from a military family. That sort of thing infuriates me. It's, very disrespectful and hurtful to people who've had veterans in their family perhaps fallen. But I'm not sure that's the right priority, and I wouldn't advocate giving a stronger, heavier sentence to someone who vandalizes a war memorial versus someone who, say, beats up an actual veteran. Violent crime should always be a stiffer sentence than vandalism. And frankly, I think 10 years is too excessive for that. But this is the point I'm driving at. That's my opinion. There needs to be public, maybe a lot of people would disagree with me, but there needs to be far more democracy in our criminal justice system than there currently is. I'm not talking about 12 good men and true, good men and women and true. I'm talking about accountability of justice. I don't think it is that accountable. Judges certainly aren't. That has to change. The only way a judge can actually be reprimanded is for professional misconduct, i.e., if they had a fling with one of the jurors. Um, but a judge who's excessively lenient often, there's very little the public can do, and I think that is wrong.